Hello, hello. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Awesome. Can I ask that everyone please mute yourself if you're able? And if you'd like to turn on your video, we welcome you to as well. We'll get started in just a minute. And I'm going to ask my lucky tech wizards, Sarah, Mark, and Emily, if you're able to mute folks and let them into the waiting room. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. We'll be starting in a minute. Awesome. I see 49 folks on the call so far. Wonderful. Hopefully I'm calling in. Today has been a great morning. So we are embracing this culture of leaning in and going with the flow. So. All right, I believe we'll be getting started in just a minute. 1 second.
Sarah, there are some OGs in the house. It's a pretty cool stroll around the block to see who's on the call.
I love it. I love it. I'm looking for Emily.
Can you hear me?
Hey, Larry.
Welcome, folks. Give me 1 second and then we'll just get started.
I'll do some filler while we're queuing up, which is just this. The ramp up to this webinar has been an epic comedy of errors, y'all. So anyone who's hosted a webinar, you can imagine all the things that go wrong. Every single one of those things happened just about 6 minutes ago. So here we are, embracing the of the program, right, Sarah?
Definitely. Awesome. Well, we will jump in. Thank you so much for your patience, everyone. Good afternoon. I assume it's 12 p.m. here in Chicago. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Rahim, and I'm an integration manager at Cara Chicago. Thank you so much for joining us today for our chat on best failures in social enterprises. As Maria said, we are embracing this comedy of errors. So thank you for your grace in advance. I will be facilitating today's discussion with our very own Maria Kim, President and CEO of Cara, and Brady Gott, Managing Director of Cleanslate, one of our enterprises. So over the next hour, we will be reflecting on lessons learned from starting and closing our social enterprises. Before we begin, I would like to take a few minutes just to do a quick tech tutorial and set some norms. So first off, this virtual event is definitely not a webinar. It is a candid conversation. So to maximize our experience, I recommend that you click on Gallery View on the top right-hand corner of your RingCentral screen. This is going to allow you to see all of the faces on one screen. And, it'll be a chance for us to recognize that we are holding space for ourselves today as a community, even virtually. And with that, I also want to recognize that this is a safe and a brave space. Being vulnerable, opening, ourselves to speak about lessons learned, and challenging ourselves. Most importantly, it's important to give and receive grace. I'm speaking in from my hotspot in my phone, so thank you in advance. If things get a little hairy, bear with us, and we will keep things moving along. Next, something that Cara Plus always likes to start with is we want this to be the loudest virtual experience you've ever participated in, meaning there are several ways that you can engage with us. First, I would like to call out the handy dandy chat box. We welcome you to drop a quick hello, what organization you belong to, or what brought you here today. Please also feel free to kind of drop your own reflections and thoughts and questions as we move through this conversation. My lovely tech wizards, Emily, Sarah, and Mark, they are going to be today's chat monitors, and they'll be supporting me as facilitator. Lastly, we're going to have a Q&A at the end where you will have the chance to raise your hand if you'd like to share a comment or question, or you can drop your question into the chat box. Moving on, most of you are longtime friends and partners of Cara Chicago, but for some of you, you're chiming in for the first time. So I'll spend a few minutes giving you an overview of Cara and what this chat is centered on. So, Cara Chicago is a 30-year-old workforce development organization, and we run social enterprises and training boot camps. We have helped people experiencing poverty move into nearly 12,000 jobs. To give you a sense of our population, roughly 1/3 of our participants never completed high school, about half have experienced justice involvement, and 90% are Black and Latinx. So in working with these individuals, we move people into roughly 1,000 jobs annually at a 7% same firm 1-year retention rate. I'm going to repeat that because it's definitely something that we're proud of. That is a 70% same firm 1-year retention rate. So when I often get asked, how does Cara's model work? There's two things you need to know up front. First is it's more than just getting the job, it's keeping the job, which means we focus on both the personal and the professional. We operate using a simulated workplace environment. So think of our program services and our enterprises as that long dress rehearsal to really get people ready for jobs. And we do this through 4 ways. The first is we rebuild. We see so many participants who come through our doors with a mentality of, I can't. Either I can't get a job or I can't keep a job. Maybe they've had life experiences that hurt their confidence, or have never been able to just take a moment to unpack some of the tougher experiences. And that's why at Cara, we don't see job training as your traditional resume review and elevator pitches. We also focus on some of the tougher stuff like love and forgiveness, because sometimes the personal can get in the way of the professional. So we focus on rebuilding hope and belief. Second, we train. This will be a space where we can dive more into our social enterprises where, we have the chance to allow folks to really represent a simulated workplace environment. So we'll hear shortly about Cleanslate, which is our exterior maintenance business, and about Connect, our temporary staffing firm. After folks have shown their workplace competencies, we then job place. So our job placement team works closely with over 70 employment partners across Chicago to create best fit matches. And finally, we retain and we grow. Again, graduation at Cara is not when you get the job, it's when you hit 1 year at that same firm. And our coaches work very closely to walk alongside participants to really get to that 1 year through monthly check-ins, helping them maintain stability, and just most of all, being that friend, which is what Cara stands for. So now that I've provided an overview of Cara, today we're going to be reflecting on a topic that comes up quite often in my work, which is the term social enterprise. A social enterprise is a mission-driven business whose primary purpose is to improve social objectives and serve the common good. And in our 30-year history, we have launched 4 and successfully sustained 2. So what I'm excited to kind of lean into today is looking at some of our failures, not as a stigma, but as an opportunity to learn and just to think about how we've grown. So happy to dive into this conversation. I don't know about you all, but I am Pakistani and I love a good spicy starter. So we're just gonna dive in. Maria, a little birdie told me, or rather your LinkedIn post from last week, that you have a motto for every first date, which is lead with the ugly. I would love to zoom out and just use this to set the tone for today's chat and just ask you to kind of respond to that and or work around debunking myths today during this chat.
Absolutely. Happy to talk about my, first date philosophy in front of some people I know and some people I've never met before. Good times. Bye all. So good morning, everybody. Super excited to see you. Emily, do me a solid and reach out to Jennifer. I think she's struggling with getting to gallery view, so please help her out. So great to see everybody from far and from near. Really happy to be in community with you today. So yes, it is true. The urban myth is true. On my first dates, I used to have this philosophy of lead with your ugly. And what I meant by that is that somehow over the course of my first date, I'm going to tell this guy all of the noise all of the ick stuff in my history. I'm going to somehow figure out a way to surface it over the scope of the conversation, because it's kind of a mini test to see if the dude still shows up on date 2, then I might have a winner, right? And so I share that analogy with you all today because that is our intent for this afternoon. Is what we're really trying to do is surface the ugly. Let's talk about it in such a way that we realize, damn, inside the ugly, there is actually a lot of beauty. There's a lot to be learned, a lot to be held, and a lot to understand. That's our intent over the scope of our brief time with you today. And to set the context for what we're going to do, I kind of want you to think about it like a gallery walk. We're about to go on a gallery walk across our 4 social enterprises since the first one we started back in 2005. And what we'll do is we'll treat the enterprises like a case study. So we're going to go into each. Cleanslate connects 180 properties in chapter 2, and we're going to unpack how we got there, what drove us to create it, and how we skinned our knees along the way. Our intent in doing this is not to kind of, I guess, puff our chest about the stuff that we screwed up, because that's never quite fun, but to normalize that as a regular part of conversation that we need to be having as a social impact community in order to get better and grow. So that's kind of our goal for today, Sarah, just to set the tone, and I'll pass it back to you to kick us off.
Thanks, Maria. So to start us out, I'm going to pass it over to Brady to talk about Cleanslate. Would you mind sharing more about where we started and where we are today?
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. You know, this like Maria and Sarah at the beginning, this has been a challenge to get this thing going. So glad to talk to you and see you all. But a lot of you know Cleanslate, but for those who don't, Cleanslate was started in 2005. We were lucky to receive a Goldman executive for a year on loan from the company, and Mark Carroll came to Cara and really stood up Cleanslate to address an internal need. So as individuals came into our program who had higher barriers to employment, they would sit a bit longer in inventory waiting for placements to come downstream. And so Mark stood up Cleanslate loosely based on what you see the Doe Fund doing in New York City with Ready, Willing, and Able. And so we launched a crew on 79th Street that, you know, swept the sidewalks, emptied the garbage cans as an easy on-ramp back into the workforce for our participants. So Cleanslate still exists. You know, we're getting ready to hit 16 years, and we work in 50 neighborhoods in Northwest Indiana and some suburban markets in Chicago. It hasn't been a smooth ride. So when I took over as executive way back in the end of 2010, one of the first days on the job, our CFO told us that Cleanslate had an intercompany debt of $1 million back to Cara. And so, you know, if we believe that social enterprises are here to solve all our financial dreams, it's typically not true. It took Cleanslate nearly 7 years to begin to drive a surplus to help the financial health of the rest of the organization. And as we kind of sorted through our first decade to continue to run Cleanslate at a sustainable mark, there was a lot of mission margin tension. I know that's like a cliche, but there was a lot of tough negotiations as we weren't a fish, but we weren't a bird, and we're somewhere in between. And so, you know, establishing great communications and partnerships with staff across the organization was key, really, to helping Cleanslate strive and ultimately survive the way it has the last 16 years, to keep the Cleanslate experience open to about 400 people each year.
Thanks, Brady. It's wonderful to see the success of Cleanslate today, which is such a visible entity of Cara. So I'm gonna throw it back to like my first week on the job. I received this mysterious case study in my email called 180 Properties. Maria, I would love to hear your take on that and to learn more about that.
Yeah, so if I were to connect the dots between Cleanslate and 180 Properties. So Cleanslate, again, exterior maintenance business, as Brady described. It took us 7 years to get in the black. Just want to underscore that point. And in part, the reason why is because social enterprises, many of you that are already in the work might understand, it's a bit of a self-sabotaging business. And what I mean by that is that in Brady's case, in 1 year, he may experience 400% turnover. What? What normal business on any normal platform would want 400% turnover? But when we talk about the tug between mission and margin, that is exactly what we're talking about. Is our mission is about helping people experiencing poverty get back to gainful employment. And so that means that often the top performers inside your social enterprises are going to end up getting plucked by the private sector at a rapid rate. They're going to be placed into more permanent employment. That's what we want. That's a win for the mission. It is a loss for the margin of the business, because we end up then having very new people that are constantly in the crews. So these are the types of tensions that we've been grappling with over the years. And the way that then years later, somewhere around 2009, we might recall that this country entered into the Great Recession, right? We realized we were on the heels of a massive foreclosure crisis. The housing bubble had just burst. And oh my gosh, and how fragile all of our neighborhoods quickly became. Do you remember, you might recall all the boarded up houses inside all of our neighborhoods, particularly disproportionately in neighborhoods that have the highest concentration of poverty. And in the wake of that crappy situation, we stood around and asked ourselves, well, what is it that we can do to turn these lemons into lemonade? And we had this core competency of crew-based work that we've been doing at Cleanslate for, at that time, probably 4 or 5 years or so. So we had that core competency, but we didn't really have a competency in housing. So we found a friend, and our friend was Mercy Housing. Some of you might be familiar with them as one of the largest subsidized housing providers in our country. They had a housing core competency. We had a crew-based core competency. We joined forces and we created something called 180 Properties. And 180 Properties was called 180 because it was about flipping something 180 degrees, right? And we thought, oh, this is so clever. It's also about what we're doing with individuals where they might not have opportunity and we're moving towards opportunity. Maybe we're flipping things 180 degrees. It was like a whole, conflation of great things. And in the beginning, the banking industry, who had so radically contributed to the foreclosure crisis in our country, was experiencing massive, I'll call it Catholic guilt, because I'm a Catholic and I know what that feels like. So the massive Catholic guilt, which means their guilt made them throw a lot of money at this problem. And so 180 Properties became this social enterprise that was a recipient of a lot of capital, a lot of grant capital from banking institutions that wanted to be a part of the solution on the other side of the foreclosure crisis. And with that investment, we started doing property preservation. What does that mean? That means we went to homes that were boarded up, or went to homes that were in foreclosure rather, and got them secure, cleaned them out, took all the trash out of the homes, cleaned them out, boarded them up, maintained the lawns, and did all the administrative processes in the back office to support that. That's awesome, because that's creating all of these jobs. It also created a new set of jobs, administrative jobs in the back office to manage all of that flow. And things were going well. And the jobs were going up, revenue was going up, things were going great. And then we crashed because we suffered the consequence of a very common mistake that small businesses make. Forget about social enterprises, but small businesses in general can make the error of having too much reliance on a single source of revenue. That was the case for us. We had grown, the highest peak of our revenue until just very recently in 2009. But a lot of it was on the back of 85% of our business was coming from one bank that was needing the services to maintain the properties in their portfolio, from one bank. And when that one bank said, I think I'm going to take all of this and move it over to a third-party administrator, that third-party administrator looked at our price point and they were like, nah. And our price point was not sexy because we were still a small business. We didn't have the economies of scale that some of the larger players had. And as a result, that third-party administrator, who had no Catholic guilt, who had no connection with our mission, no kind of priority of helping the people in our population to get back to work, made a sound business decision and cut us out. In the wake of that shift, we tried to pivot. We were like doggies in the lake, doing doggy paddle to try to pivot and flip what was a property preservation business into a property maintenance business. That means think of that as light rehab of properties and things like that. That makes sense intellectually. It doesn't make sense missionally, if that's a word, because you remember the reason why we started social enterprises in the first place was so that we created transitional jobs at scale, so that we could help people that needed more meat on their resume to fill in the blank, so to speak, and become more marketable for the outside world. When we became a property maintenance business, those jobs were permanent. You needed to have somebody with like legit carpentry and other skills to do those jobs. So that means instead of having 40 some odd jobs at a time, you had 3 or 2 or 6, you know what I mean? And so the whole mission value was getting depleted as well. And then finally, because that pivot to a totally new business platform had to occur, the financing of it was also different. We used to make money on all the transactions of property preservations, and that was a lot of transactions and a lot of bills being paid. When you go to property rehab, you're being billed over the long term. It's like you're being billed on a project basis. So the time at which you get actually cash infused into the organization, the space between those 2 milestones would be super wide. We couldn't do it. We burned through cash too fast. And we unfortunately had to, in 2014, sunset the organization. And that's a fancy word for saying we filed for bankruptcy in 2014. That was my first month as CEO. That was my first set of phone calls as CEO. Like, hey, new girls in town, and FYI, we're filing for bankruptcy for this large social enterprise. It was so rough, but it was absolutely the right decision for us to make so that we preserved the cash that we had. We understood that our main goal was not about making money, it was about making mission. And making mission for us was creating more and more jobs. And so that decision, while brutal, was absolutely in the best interest for the sustainability of Cara overall from a financial perspective and for Cara from a mission perspective as well. Sarah, you're on mute still. Sorry, dear.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Maria. I think one thing we often hear with social enterprises is this idea of folks saying that sometimes slow growth is a better strategy instead of scaling up quickly. I still think sometimes there's a tension there in terms of strategy. Do you have thoughts on that?
I mean, that's definitely where we'll end up going when we talk about connects. So I could hold that one when we get to connects if you'd like as well.
Sure. Awesome. So moving on to another social enterprise, which I also recently learned about, which was also kind of coming on, following up with 180 Properties, is Chapter 2. So Brady, I'd love to pass it on to you to kind of share about that.
Sure, absolutely. So Chapter 2 was an interesting business. It was really created on the, a bit on the direction of board members. So if you think of a lot of boards, they're composed of business people who are entrepreneurs, and I think often when boards get to kind of the taste of social enterprise, they often are hungry for more. So there was an opportunity with a little bit of funding to launch a business that would build skills for our participants in logistics, warehousing, shipping. And Chapter 2, as kind of the name may denote, it collected used media from the waste stream, and then those items were remarketed on places like half.com or Amazon or what have you. So we go from something Cleanslate, 180, which were very exterior focused, kind of gritty, dirty work, and to something that now we have like a product, at least something that we can touch and feel. And so I loved it. It was great. It was fun. But we also were smarter now. So now we're into our third business, and we actually have in place some metrics to guide us. So metrics around financial performance, metrics around social outcome. Those things help guide our pursuit. A lot of that, again, was a response to 180. We just heard about 180 and filing for bankruptcy. A lot of people would joke that Chapter 2 was going to file Chapter 13 or whatever. So we wanted to do well with Chapter 2, and even if it didn't succeed, this new skill building business, we were protecting our brand, protecting the enterprise's cash, and so we were smarter with this. We went from, I think Maria or Sarah said it, in one of our conversations, instead of from idea to business, we went from idea to test. And so we gave ourselves 18 months. And at the end of that 18 months, as we kind of peered in the future, the cash flow wasn't moving at the rate that we wanted it to. So you can imagine all those Amazon transactions. If you've been a seller, like they take a good chunk, you take a postage and things of that nature as well. And not all social enterprises are the same as far as job creation. So Cara, our goal of creating jobs, chapter 2 is going to produce maybe 10, a dozen, 15 jobs a year. And so even at a loss, it wasn't really convincing that it was going to create a large social impact. So at the end of those 18 months, after collecting about 1 million books, doing about 350,000 in sales, we opted to pull the plug on that. I think it shows our maturity as an organization that even though we stepped on the gas, we had a process to watch the health of this business and how it would affect the rest of the organization.
Thanks, Brady. I want to call out too, as Sarah's mentioning in the chat, I know we're kind of going through each case study. We welcome you to put your thoughts and questions around Chapter 2, 180 Properties, and Cleanslate and Connects into the chat, and we'll be sure to answer them shortly. So I'm going to move us on to our 4th social enterprise, Connect. So passing it back to Maria to walk us through that.
Yeah, and before I step into Connects, I just want to pull on one thread that Brady set up. The idea to test instead of idea to business is a big one, because I think all of us in this sector, you get to that point where you're supposed to make a decision, and you're paralyzed to make the decision because there's still some good there. And so you're like, ooh, should we just 3 more months, 6 more months, 9 more months? You never know. And it could have been premature, our decision. Chapter 2 could have grown to something, but we were very intentional around, okay, let's just set up this bar. And if within that specific time box, these deliverables didn't happen, so our test was completed, but these outcomes that we thought were going to happen, our hypothesis didn't turn out to be true, then we have to have the discipline to say no. And that was difficult, but also a good muscle for us to have. And even now, I might look back on that and say, did we pull it too early? I don't know, but it was important for us to learn the lesson of actually committing to the decision in the time frame in which to do so, because that is such a tough muscle for our sector to develop. And then the good thing about the sunset of Chapter 2 is it went away with little fanfare because it was simply a line of business within Cleanslate. It wasn't its own P&L. It wasn't its own separate entity. And so our ability to treat it like a test and then fold it like a test was also enabled by the fact that we just opened it as a singular line of business. So Connect. So I think one of the themes that you might be hearing in these case studies is that something happened in the world and we responded to it. That is true for many of our social enterprises. There was an externality that happened, an external shock that happened, and also juxtaposing that to anytime there's an external shock in our country, it absolutely has an effect on the job market, and that job market effect obviously has an effect on us and our mission. So the next externality that comes up is now we're what, 2011, 2013, we're in the throes of the back part of the Great Recession. And employers now are skittish because they can't see when we're going to come out the other side of the J curve. They can't see when are things going to go back to normal and we're going to see the level of business that we've had before. And so many employers moved from permanent hire to contract. And we were like, well, hell, if everybody moves to contract and we don't have a piece in that process, are we losing our ability to build mission? And that was somewhat of the genesis of Connects. So Connects is a mission-driven staffing company that started in earnest in 2013 and is an employer of record for Cleanslate, but also is providing access to all of to employers that are interested in contract staffing as opposed to direct hire. Different than Cleanslate, it took us 3 years instead of 7 to get in the black. And some of the reasons why I believe that to be true is because staffing is so adjacent to our regular work. So sometimes the distance between what you have as your core competency and what you're trying to do in your social enterprise, that distance obviously has an effect on your ability to run the business efficiently. But that's what we do. We help connect people to employment. Contract staffing was just a slight deviation from that. And also our infrastructure to support such a business was less intense. And so between those two reasons, we were able to get from 0 to 3 years to profitability. In terms of the question that Sarah asked earlier, she said, you know, sometimes there's this tension between what people might want in terms of hockey stick level growth or more sustained incremental growth over time. Connects is most definitely in category number 2. I think initially we thought, maybe we've got a shot because this is our core competency that we could make more of a dent in staffing, but we frankly did not have the economies of scale as like a Robert Half or a Manpower or fill in your blank XYZ staffing company. And so our pricing is always a bit of a premium for an employer. So our best target clients as it relates to Connects are employers that value not just the niche of contract staffing, but more specifically, the mission value of being able to hire talent that is sticky talent to be sure, but is also part of a larger mission of helping to heal our city and to bring more people back to employment.
Thank you, Maria. I think what's interesting for me, zooming out, is just thinking about the journey of these enterprises and how they're so interwoven to the participant journey and our work in centering the job seeker. And I think, you know, before we open to Q&A, I would just love to hear from both of you. What would be like a final takeaway message? We've heard a lot about, you know, scaling slowly, scaling thoughtfully. How might you kind of wrap us up?
Yeah, I don't think I have a quick cliche to throw in there, but I do have a couple things. Maybe one will become a cliche. We'll see. As I was kind of thinking about how nonprofits who pursue a business and then start up, I think, you know, if you blindfolded me and you know, I ate chicken, I said it tastes like chicken. Frog legs, it tastes like frog legs. I eat ostrich, it tastes like chicken. I think nonprofits often look at their businesses and they taste like chicken to them, and they treat them all like chicken. Those businesses, those social enterprises, they're something different. They're a bit of a different beast, and though they need to align with your capacity and your capital and your mission, all those important things, it's important that you import the tools you need. And so, for example, in the story, What 180, I think one thing that would have been grand if we had hired the expertise we need to operate that business at the onset where it kind of was sluggish out of the gate. I think one thing that Cara has built a very good muscle in over the years is a very strong accounting program and HR program. So I remember, I don't know, 7-8 years ago, we had cost accounting. So now I can look at each unique business line and see the profitability. I can look at each customers. And so when I bid, you know, contracts annually, that we can be smart about how we bid things. If we take a step back, you know, if we were to look at venture number 5, we've had some great friends through Red F and through the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, who created tools for us that have basically a decision tool that allows us to kind of plug in what we want to do as a business and some of the social impact it would create and the economic impact it would have as well. And so we have some of those decision-making tools that have been very, very helpful. So I think, you know, I would say one last thing is, and Maria again pointed out, is going from idea to test. So when Cleanslate launched, for example, in the suburban market in Aurora, Illinois, just an hour west of Chicago, we had a 1-year test with that. So even though it was Cleanslate, we were in a new market and we wanted to test. And so we gave it a year. You know, is it creating jobs? Is it performing financially to help us make the decision of you know, go or stop?
Awesome. And if I were to build on that, I think Brady's comment about know what you know and know what you don't is a critical one. I think part of our our lag in 180 properties and what could have helped us had we thought about this sooner was to get an individual with domain expertise way earlier in the process. I think in our sector, we have a bit of hero syndrome, if I can be so bold as to suggest that we think because we just live, feel, breathe all the things about our missions that we can do everything. But the truth is that some of these businesses and the enterprises that support them require a core competency that is beyond our natural skill set, and we have to have the strength to be able to recognize it. And the last one that I'll rest on, Sarah, is today we've talked a lot about the fact that the road is lumpy and long, you know, in many degrees. It's also awesome. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't say that if it were not for Cleanslate and Connects, we would not be able to achieve the level of mission impact that we have. So it is lumpy and long, but it also has a great upside if we take all of these cautionary tales into context.
Thanks so much, Maria and Brady. I'm really glad we have about 20 minutes to just engage everyone in this space right now. And we've been seeing questions coming in through the chat. So I'm going to ask Sarah we'll start with the written questions and then open it up for discussion. So Sarah, would you mind sharing maybe the first one or two questions that came up?
Absolutely. So this question came from Aina. And Maria, I'm going to pose it over to you. Can you tell us the metrics you use to test Chapter 2? Or I'm going to add a little of my own flavor here. If we didn't test it, which metrics do you wish we would have tested?
We did test it. We had two indicators, and Brady can correct me if I'm wrong. One was cash flow positivity, and one was job creation. And I think on cash flow positivity, we did not get there inside of the 18-month time frame. And on job creation, we were still, you know, at our kind of lowest points, we were at 2 jobs. And so we weren't achieving on either of those metrics in the time span that we gave for our test.
Thank you. So similarly, Maria, you talked a little bit about how it's taken our social enterprises a few years to move into the black. Heather wanted to know, how comfortable are our funders with our runway to profitability?
So first, I'll start by saying I see you on the calls, some funders. So, you know, this is kind of a Vegas, not Vegas moment. I don't know. But the honest answer is it depends. Some were in the beginning, I'd say that more funders were actually gunning for the goal, so to speak. We're more like, wait, why can't we get to this level of growth? It was very shiny object. It was very like, this seems like a viable way to diversify revenue. That is so exciting. And the pressure to get from zero to sustainability was high. I think over time, as people started to understand more of the nuance related to social enterprise, the best funders are inquisitive as to, well, what does that runway actually look like? And what are the trade-offs for getting to profitability? What are the consequences on your mission if you go from zero to in the black, versus what are the consequences on your mission to the positive if you might take a slow walk to get there? And so I would say the best funders, whomever they may be, are the ones that hold space for that level of questioning and that level of understanding.
Yeah, and maybe if I can insert a comment here. Again, I love making this comment around the idea of, you know, if you stand up your own business and it does, let's say it creates 100 jobs a year, but it loses $100,000 a year, I think organizations can make decisions and arguments around $1,000 per job a year is not a big cost for a program. If we were just kind of set up a program arm that had no incoming revenue that a social enterprise would. So I think there's arguments that can be made to tolerate losses for your businesses if they're aligning and fulfilling mission at a rate that can't be matched by a supplemental approach.
Thank you, Brady. I'm going to stick with you for a minute to hoping you can field Joe's question. So he was wondering that when wrestling with potential function creep, if there were any conversations that Cara or Cleanslate had about spinning off Chapter 2 or finding a new home for it. He mentioned even in its nascency, was there a market for Chapter 2?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, you know, when we look at social enterprises, you know, the way that even Cleanslate is structured, we're a separate LLC. So if Cara at some point wanted to sell Cleanslate, they could, or bring investors in. And so tools like social enterprises can be valuable assets to a nonprofit organization. I think because Chapter 2A, like you said, it was very young, but there's also a lot of competition in the market. So there's a lot of hustle that goes into driving book collections. There's some huge players like Better World Books out of South Bend, Indiana, I believe, who they're just monsters. And they have, as Maria mentioned, the efficiency of scale that would be very hard for us to compete with. Plus, our initial funder was in this space, and they wouldn't feel comfortable with us doing that. So our initial funder runs comparable type businesses and have partners throughout the United States who do the same kind of work. We were able to sell off the majority of our assets to like organizations. So all our back inventory of 500,000 books and our collection bins and some other, our box truck, we could sell those. But yeah, there wasn't an option to sell Chapter 2.
Thank you, Brady. So we are gonna stay on a similar thread in terms of how we think about our social enterprises and what we're gonna do with them, and go to Dina's question, which is how valuable is our board in helping us build businesses for our social enterprise, or build business rather for our social enterprises?
I can take first stab. And
Great.
Want to. So each social enterprise does have its own board subcommittee that supports the operators of those businesses. I think one of the great things is boards typically have connections, and usually why they're on your board. So I can speak from Cleanslate and operating Chapter 2. Those board members were really essential at making contacts to grow our business. But also, I think they're excellent, coaches and consultants. So as you are starting a business and it's a bit unfamiliar territory, it's great to have a board who's hungry to see it grow often, but often have a network that you can tap into some degree.
Thank you, Brady. And you did a great job hitting at, what it looks like to find business for the social enterprises, but we know that's not just it. We also know that there's a lot of support that goes into it. So I want to get to Katrina's question, which is, how separate or tied are the supportive staff teams between the mission and social enterprises? So thinking about human resources, marketing, finance, etc. Maria, I'll pass it to you for that one.
Yeah, so Brady in his opening remarks said that this is how good we are at cultivating new talent. So we hire this whip smart guy, his name is Brady Gott, for a leadership role. And as he's ready to take over the helm of Cleanslate sometime later, he realizes, oops, there's $1 million intercompany debt between Cleanslate and Cara. So number one, bad on us, lesson learned in terms of our ability to share information in a disclosing way during the onboarding process. And number two, good on him for understanding the scope of the issue and what needed to happen as a result. All that to say, each of the social enterprises are supported by the mothership. And so by the mothership, I mean there's a whole set of infrastructure at Cara, human resources, technology, the systems, the facilities, all of the things. All of that support is coming from the home office. And so there is a bit of calculus that needs to happen by the business to understand it's receiving that support and paying for it. How do we keep both Cara whole and the business whole as a result of that infrastructure support? I think the other piece too is I favor it that way. There are times when Brady would say, I wish that we just went off on our own and we had our own resources because we could grow at a faster clip. And he and I would have a bit of a tug of war to say, no, I want you to stay. I want you to stay connected in this way because it can help us as an organization be aware of our enterprise costs, because we can be more discrete in terms of how our costs are allocated amongst each entity, and because we can standardize our practice, particularly as it relates to things like systems and human resources, such that we're really creating one composite culture and not 4 different businesses under one umbrella.
Thank you, Maria. So we think about the umbrella operation that Cara is and how we support our social enterprises. And we had a question about how the pandemic is impacting that. So specifically, are the social enterprises experiencing some stress because of the pandemic? And if so, how are you working through that? And that question came from Molly.
Brady, I might have you start that one.
Yeah, Molly, thank you for the question. At Cleanslate, we chose to hit a pause when our stay-at-home order went in place in Chicago and the state of Illinois about a year ago. We paused for 17 days to make sure, A, that we were defined as an essential business. When the FAQ came out from the governor's office, we did fall within that. But those 17 days gave us time to put safety measures in place, develop protocols. I see Christine from our HR team here develop a system with her when there were exposure or cases. But there has been a cost burden. So we've chosen to pay our staff who are on the front lines, as well as our workers in our program, a hazard pay. So that's not free. I think organization between both businesses, it's around $25,000 a month that we're paying out in hazard pay while those advisories are in place. Surprisingly, the business has done well this year. Actually, Cleanslate's on track to probably have its best year since inception. A lot of weird things happened, and this is where, the idea of being a social enterprise is kind of, your chromosomes are 23 and 23 business and mission, where we've had long-term customers agree to pay full freight on their invoices while we were closed for those 17 days. So even though we weren't providing service, they said, hey, we love what you guys do. We understand what you're doing. We want to be behind you and just show some solidarity. So that was amazing and very encouraging. But the costs have gone up, but our gross revenue and our operating margin are ahead of budget.
Thank you, Brady. I want to stay on you for a minute. So you talked earlier about how we had a wonderful partner in Goldman Sachs to help us stand up Cleanslate. And so this question is, did we have a funding partner to start our business? So we know yes for Cleanslate. And actually, I will point it to Maria for this. For Connects and maybe 180 Properties, was our funding internal and then we picked up funders, or did we also have funders help us jumpstart those businesses?
Mm-hmm. The one nuance I might add to the Cleanslate funding origin story is we had Goldman Sachs as a in-kind sponsor, which is to say we had an executive on loan from Goldman that was on our board that started the business, but no capital. We got, say, $50,000 from local institutions. Basically said, go build a program. So we did have some seed capital from private industry and then built clients around that seed. Differently, for 180 Properties, we did not start with that jump shot. We had a different origin story because the opportunity was so clear, and because there were banks that were both interested as clients and as eventual philanthropists. We stepped out on faith effectively to start that business with Mercy Housing, with not the same level of seed capital as Cleanslate had in the beginning. And with Connects, the same story is true. And in fact, one thing that I didn't mention about Connects is we actually had to start Connects. It wasn't simply opportunistic because of the state of the Great Recession. Our employer of record for Cleanslate blew up. Do you ever have this happen when a vendor blows up and then you're kind of looking around like, well, if we can't figure out how to find a new one, I guess we best do it ourselves. So we had to create Connects in the beginning and then evolved it into a more opportunistic play given the recession. So in those cases, we did not have the type of seed private that we had with Cleanslate.
I'm going to ask one last question from the chat, then we'll open it up to broader Q&A for people who might be thinking something but haven't had the chance to say it yet. So we'll land on our last question from Kevin, which is, does Cara plan to start any more social enterprises, even with all these successes and these failures?
Well, I'll say one thing that Sarah and I had talked about in preparation for this call was that the world has multiple perspectives on the term social enterprise. Social enterprise can include Tom's Shoes, private company doing good stuff and, getting somebody else a pair of shoes for every pair of shoes you buy. Some people can be just doing good work as a social mission, but not actually creating jobs in tandem. And then this third category, there's a school of thought that calls it employment social enterprises, is the domain that we have typically fallen in as Cara. There is the work that Sarah and Sarah represent today. Cara Plus is arguably a social enterprise of the medium category of it's doing good work. It has earned income coming from customers who are paying for this service. So that effectively is kind of our third social enterprise right now. And in terms of our fourth, that's a decision the new leadership team of Cara will eventually make. My bet is that it'll be in a line of business that's adjacent to the larger work of Cleanslate that can fit that same crew-based model. Lots of jobs can be created, et cetera, et cetera. I wonder if I can give the mic to Stephen for a second, because I saw him on mute before and he shared something in the chat. Stephen, I wonder if you might give some color commentary.
Sure. So good to see you, Maria, and our partners at Cara. So I think the funding perspective is interesting. Normally, organizations fund your traditional 501c3 organizations, and it's for a program that's already been, demonstrated and whatnot. But I think more and more organizations are having a little more of a appetite for experimentation. And I said, as long as you have two core things. One, you have a sound theory of change, saying that we believe that if we do this, if we do X, then Y will happen. If there's a good theory of change, and if there is alignment with the mission. So for instance, I lead our community engagement work for Verizon here in Chicago and in the Milwaukee markets. So our core areas include digital inclusion, climate protection, which is environmental sustainability work, and human prosperity, which is largely workforce-based. So we also have a policy area in criminal justice reform. So when you look at what are the organizations that can check off multiple boxes. So the training that Cara offers involves a digital literacy component to it. It's very much workforce driven. And there is certainly a component towards returning citizens and those who are hardest to hire. So when you have that alignment along multiple streams, and again, you have a very clear theory of change of what you're trying to do, then funding, there's certainly a greater appetite again for experimenting, even if an organization isn't in the black, so to speak. If you can see what the path is, you can certainly make that that positive funding decision.
Mm-hmm. Appreciate that. The thread there is more about the more we can get funders to fund for insight and not necessarily for zero to impact. When we're talking about a test, the better off I believe our sector can be. Sarah?
Thanks, Stephen. We've got time for one more question. So if anyone here has a question for Maria, for Brady, no question is off limits. Feel free to come on in.
Hi, Frederick here. Hi, Maria. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Frederick.
Hey, Frederick.
Hey, I'm so excited to be here. My question is, I think the takeaways. What have you seen as the top 5 things that you would recommend to someone who's seeking to build such success that Cara has? So what would you tell are the 5 things that an organization should take in mind moving forward?
I have some. Maybe between Brady and I, we can get to 5. From Cleanslate, I learned copy, paste, edit. So we didn't make up Cleanslate. It was based off of the Doe Fund in New York, a robust, vibrant, awesome social enterprise. We pasted it in Chicago. We talked to the local municipality, i.e. the mayor's office at the time, to say, how can we have this add real value? And they said, well, don't have it be in the shishi-poo-poo neighborhoods, be in the community. and create jobs and transform communities in the process. So that was our edit. But we didn't have all the ramp up of design because we could just copy what they already did. And then my second one might be social enterprise is kind of just more different money, but it's not efficacious unless you're constantly playing the tug of war between mission and margin, as Brady teed up. Unless you're constantly understanding, well, are we doing both? Are we building a pathway to a viable business and also building a pathway to viable jobs? And you have to hold those two tensions together at all times. And then third, Brady, I'm giving you lots of runway to come up with 2 baller insights. But third would be social enterprise isn't a silver bullet. So as soon as your board starts going, hey, social enterprise, we've got this gap in our P&L, like why don't we just whip up a business and that's gonna solve all of our problems? We have to remember the time suck, money suck, mission shift that can happen as a result of an unplanned social enterprise. And so just keep that as top of mind as well. Brady?
Yeah, I don't think anything as wonderful as those 3 first points, Frederick. But I'd say be ready to fail, be ready to get up from a black eye. Those things will happen, whether they're your 180 experience or your chapter 2 more sophisticated experience. Those things will happen, and then make sure that you keep your organizational North Star. So at Cara, it's gainful employment. So organizations can be pulled in different directions through grants, but also through their businesses. Those can drive them in directions that ultimately sabotage the work they set out to do.
Thanks, Frederick. I think that was the perfect question to wrap us up on. I just want to give a quick thank you to all of you for your questions, for your engagement, for your comments. This is like the first time we're experimenting with this format, so I feel so privileged that 70 of you showed up to spend your lunch hour with us and to chat and learn. Thank you to Maria and Brady for sharing today, for Sasha and Joe for sharing their insights about Connect with me. At Cara Plus, we often say that short-term failure is required for long-term success. And in preparation for today's chat, I heard Maria share a phrase, which is that, the truth is on our side. And that's something that we evolved with time. I also want to acknowledge that there's so much pressure on this sector around perfectionism, and that not every outcome has to be viewed as a win or a loss. So I hope today's community and space that we built can be an example that we can normalize failure, not as a mistake, but as learning and growth. So thank you so much for experimenting with us, for leaning in, for getting curious. We're excited to have more of these offerings and ways to connect and engage and reflect. So it's been a privilege.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks so much, folks. Take care.
Lars, I miss you. Hope you're doing good.
Hey, yes. Hey, yeah, let's catch up. Me
That would
too.
be great. That would be great.
I saw some of the other guys on a Schusterman event the other day.
Oh.
Yeah, Kesia and what's his name?
Oh, and Brandon.
Brandon,
Brandon
yeah.
Fleming, yeah.
Yeah, it was
awesome.
impressive.
That's awesome.
They did really cool. It was cool to hear. Yeah.
That's awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
We'll
Well,
connect offline.
Yes, please. Yeah, and I'm excited for you. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. I'll see you when I'm West Coast bound.
Yes,
but hey, just up the road,
Yeah, right.
Congratulations, Maria.
Yeah.
Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate it. Thanks, Lars.
Yeah.
Bye.